Good afternoon, classmates. My name is Chris Stoner. I'm a former Petty Officer, United States Navy. My literature review is on military chain of command and environmental interference. Terminal learning objectives for this exercise. At the end of the screencast, the reader will be able to identify the structural and operational units of the chain of command, identify communications breakdowns, and identify the flaws that are inherent within the chain of command. Enable learning objectives, kind of like an point A to point B type approach. And by identifying the core elements, the viewer will be able to reach terminal learning objectives. Identify the chain of command from the top down, understand the composition of the armed forces, realize the mission of the armed forces, and identify relevant issues that demonstrate failure of the chain of command. What is chain of command? The chain of command is a linear model of leadership that lends itself to hierarchy, wherein the person on top controls the operations of those members on bottom through the use of intermediaries. Members within the chain of command expect to lead and to be led. Even the President of the United States is accountable to some degree to the constituency of the United States voters. Understanding the chain of command means that we have to understand basically how the armed forces are set up. In the armed forces, each member is a part of the chain of command. The President is considered the Commander-in-Chief. The Secretary of Defense heads the Department of Defense, is responsible to the President for all issues defense-related. Within each branch of the military, a general officer is appointed as a secretary for that branch. They in turn report directly to the Secretary of Defense. Here's a hierarchical view of basically how the chain of command works, beginning with the President, going down to the secretaries of the different branches. Now, if you can imagine, this would continue down all the way from the secretaries of the branches to the generals, to the colonels, to the regional commands, subordinate commands within the regions, all the way basically down to the individual member of the armed forces. Now, the Department of Defense is composed of military branches. Each of these branches has a specific mission. That means that these specific missions means that they have to have specific training to accomplish those missions. The Department of Defense, or the DoD, is responsible for providing the budget to provide the training to the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force. Contrary to popular belief, the Coast Guard is not a member of the Department of Defense. Rather, it is a member of the Department of Homeland Security. Also, contrary to popular belief, the Marine Corps is not its own branch, not its own entity. It is a subsidy for naval power ashore. Branch level flow. We will begin with the branch secretary. For example, the Secretary of the Navy. Regional command would be a command such as Naval Special Warfare Group 1, Coronado, California. Its adjacent administrative units would provide the logistics and supply for the operational units in order to accomplish their mission. Subcommands would report under the operational units. Subordinate commands would be commands such as SEAL Teams 1, 3, 5, and 7, also located in Coronado, California. These base commanders, such as the Naval Special Warfare Group commander at Coronado, would be in charge of training and things of that nature, whereas unit commanders actually be in charge of the operational commitments that units have based on the mission given to them by the President of the United States. At the command level, which this literature review really focuses on the chain of command at the command level, you'd have the unit commander, who, continuing with the Naval Special Warfare Group example, the unit commander would be a captain. He would have an executive officer that would be a commander or lieutenant commander, and he would have intermediaries acting as officers, which would disseminate information from the commander to staff NCOs, who in turn give that to junior NCOs and the junior enlisted. Now, the problems that tend to occur here will be addressed later on as we continue through the chain of command. How the chain of command works. Basically, information flows from the top down to the next level in the model. At each level, certain interferences may exist. For example, if you look here, I have an example of Colonel Mustard. Let's say Colonel Mustard wants to tell Sergeant Slaughter to go find a driver. Sergeant Slaughter is going to go find a driver to drive Colonel Mustard around Iraq. Now, which of the three privates he chooses is going to depend on the specific types of relationships that he has with these privates. For example, Private Schmuckatelli may be a total dirtbag, and Private Schmuckatelli because of his disciplinary issues and his lack of military bearing, he and Sergeant Slaughter probably aren't going to get along very well. However, Private Parts and Sergeant Slaughter, whenever they're back in the rear, probably they might go out drinking on the weekends. They have a different type of relationship than Private Schmuckatelli and Sergeant Slaughter. Private Lesson is a common type of occurrence in the military. Someone who just joined the military to get their college paid for, has absolutely nothing to do with professional soldiering, as opposed to just accomplishing personal goals. As a result of these different types of relationships, the dissemination of information will be different to each person. And quickly, I'd like to talk with you about Henry Fayol. Henry Fayol was born July 29, 1841. He died November 19, 1925. Henry Fayol developed theories on business administration while he was working for a mining company. He studied business administration. Many of his theories were widely accepted, most were implemented, and he is considered today to be among the pioneers of management theory. Fayolism contains 6 basic functions, and those functions are highlighted here. Those functions consist of forecasting, planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling. And as you'll see in the next slide, Fayolism and the military troop leading steps are very, very similar in nature. The military troop leading step being right here. Begin planning, arrange reconnaissance, make reconnaissance for the plan, complete the plan, issue the order, and perhaps most importantly, supervise the troops. Because of the military's unique mission sets, it is subject to different types of interference than, say, a Kinko's office or a Starbucks. Most organizations like Kinko's, Starbucks, they do everything they can to make it very, very easy to work there. Whereas the military, the pay sucks, the uniforms are ugly, and it's very, very difficult to accomplish missions in hostile environments. Okay, so real quick, the sources of interference that I found were identified in my literature review were the environment, personnel, situational hazards, stress, physical communication breakdown, equipment failure, and mission requirements. It's important to remember and understand that the military is very unique in the way it accomplishes its mission. Because there are so many unique sources of interference, it's important for the commander to be able to control the integrity of the chain of command by implementing mechanisms that will allow him to reinforce the integrity of the chain of command. As you'll see here, it's very important that the commander's intent be widely distributed. If a commander wants to tell his people that they need to take an objective, not only does he need to tell them that he needs them to take the objective, but he needs to tell them exactly how to take the objective. This requires supervising the tasks at hand. Again, as part of the troop leading steps is supervision. In order to supervise your troops, that means you have to develop relationships that function off mutual trust and rapport. This would allow a form of bottom-up planning, whereas people on bottom who ordinarily wouldn't have a say in how the mission would be run actually get to bring their ideas to the table in accomplishing the mission. Real quick, I'd like to talk with you about an example in particular of chain of command failure. And this incident, the Abu Ghraib prison incident, was absolutely devastating to the Americans' democratic goals in Iraq, brought on a lot of international scrutiny, and at its basics, it was due to a breakdown in communication of the chain of command. Whereas soldiers went without appropriate supervision, commanders were not integrating mechanism for redundancy. They weren't paying attention to their staff NCOs. Staff NCOs weren't paying attention to their NCOs. NCOs weren't paying attention to their junior enlisted personnel. In a word, you could call it complacency. Environmental factors did have a role in the abuse of those prisoners. However, I believe that chain of command and the failure of the chain of command's ability to communicate the commander's intent have more of a role in it than environmental factors. In conclusion, the United States Armed Forces are responsible for safeguarding the American way of life and furthering the United States' democratic goals abroad. Military commanders are given great responsibilities to act as liaisons between the United States government and third country nationals. What this means is that commanders need to reinforce the integrity of the chain of command so that whenever they tell their staff sergeants, whenever they tell their corporals to go and take this objective, that they're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, exactly when they're supposed to be doing it. Otherwise, it leads to a lack of trust from third country nationals to the commander. And in a time where commanders are given more and more responsibility to take care of third country nationals, communications breakdowns at the command level are detrimental to national policy and goals. This means it is now more important than ever for unit commanders and subordinate leadership to reinforce the chain of command by identifying sources of interference within it, and not just identifying them, but we need to address these as well. I appreciate you guys listening to me ramble on for the last 10 minutes. I'm sure you had better things to do, but I hope that you learned something. The military is not as cut and dry as most people think it is. It's very, very difficult to operate in austere environments with all kinds of communications breakdowns occurring. But I do believe that by avoiding communication breakdowns, the American people can save American lives overseas. Not only American lives, but also the lives of third country nationals. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your semester.